Is it open? I can't tell. Okay. We are waiting on someone, and as they're coming in, we will give you all a few more minutes to trickle in. Go ahead in the chat, introduce yourself, who you are, where you are in the world, all of those good things as we get ready to get started. I'm gonna play a song, and hopefully by the time the song is over, we'll be ready. Oh, there we are. Okay. Good morning.
If you wanna know real feeling, take the time for healing. A moment in the morning for prayer. Begin anew with sunrise. Wipe the dust from your eyes. Be rid of your disguises again. A little for your father, a little for your mother, a little for your sister, a little for your brother, a little love for your soul will make you whole. If you're looking for protection, learn to read directions written in the depths of your soul. Remember in the noonday, sit in peace, meditate. Stillness takes you further than you know. A little for your father, a little for your mother, a little for your sister, a little for your brother, a little love for your soul will make you whole.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this wonderful session on assessing and evaluating this work. I personally am really excited for this conversation, and I'm really thrilled with the host of people that will be joining us in interrogating some of these things. So without further ado, I will let each of the panelists introduce themselves, but I will give us some typical reminders. As always, I am Ozia Lozium. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am with Denver Public Library as a Community Connections Program Coordinator. So we will be still employing progressive stacking in our comments. What that means is if you choose to self-identify as belonging to a marginalized racial or ethnic group, feel free to use an asterisk before your comment or question so that we can prioritize that. Please, please, please put questions in the Q&A section and not the chat so that we can make sure to get to them and to at least see them, because the chat does get really full with over 600 of you. We have some preset questions that we'll be asking the panelists, but as questions are coming in, please definitely type those into the Q&A so that we can record them. We'll try and get to as many as we can, but with a lot of the questions that will be coming in, there's no way that we'll be able to do that. So we apologize in advance for that, and we'll try to at least get to a few of them. We will have moderators in the chat that are fielding both of those and our YouTube live stream, so we will be making sure that there are at least a couple eyes on that. We are recording, so these will all be live on our YouTube immediately after the session, and they will be on the symposium page a few days. Let's say a week after the symposium concludes. We do have closed captioning available, and that link will be in the chat. Unfortunately, we do not have ASL interpretation for this session, but we do have that closed captioning option. And I think that's it on my end. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Dr. Kawanna Bright to introduce herself.
Good morning, thank you, Ozzy. Dr. Kawanna Bright here, currently Assistant Professor of Library Science at East Carolina University, she, her, hers. actually graduate of the University of Denver, Research Methods Statistics program. Saw a lot of familiar faces in the chat from Denver, so hello Denver peeps. Also a lot of people I know from Library World. It's good to see some familiar names floating out there. I know you're watching me right now. Really looking forward to this conversation as well. Thank you for having me.
And Dr. Suzuho Shimasaki, do you want to go next?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for, good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. Thank you for having me here today. Really excited to connect with you all. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm the principal of Catalysts for Achieving Racial and Ethnic Equity, or CARE Equity, which is a consulting organization that I created about a decade ago, and really happy to be here to share any insights I have with working with different health organizations across the state of Colorado and addressing equity. Thank you.
And last but not least, Tariana.
Buenos dias. Good morning. This is Tariana Navas-Nieves. I'm the Director of Cultural Affairs for the City and County of Denver. Our agency's name is Denver Arts and Venues. We own and operate performing arts facilities, including Red Rocks Amphitheater, the Denver Performing Arts Complex, the Coliseum, the Convention Center, and the McNichol Civic Center building. And we also oversee the city's public art program, creative industries, art and cultural districts, and all our cultural events throughout the city. And in this capacity, I oversee our equity efforts in the agency. And I'm also on the mayor's equity leadership team, which is a group of 3 women, and we oversee the city's equity efforts from training to agency efforts throughout the city. So happy to be here.
We are so thrilled with this panel. As you can all hear, we have we have 3 different perspectives, but from 3 completely different, I think, vantage points. I'm really grateful for the wisdom that you all bring and the unique perspectives that you all have to offer. So my first question is, and for these questions, I would love for all of you to answer each of them. If you don't want to answer, you definitely do have the autonomy and they do have to not answer, but I would love to hear from all of you. Why does assessment matter in EDI work? And I will open that to whoever wants to jump in.
I'll jump in first, just to throw it out there. Especially, I come from the perspective of academic libraries in particular. And basically for libraries, you know, assessing DEI work is basically as important as assessing the other work we do. We are one of the most challenged organizations on most campuses in terms of why we receive any funding at all. We bleed money, we know this, we give money away. And we're challenged in everything we do. So we're already being challenged on that level. If we're also challenging the importance of DEI in the work we do, then assessment has been the answer. So we've been doing assessment of our services, of our resources, of how important we are to the campus. We also have to do the same thing for the DEI work we do. We have to show that this is important for the work we do, that this is not something that, oh, it's a thing we're just gonna jump on the bandwagon everyone's working on. No, it's important for the work we do in libraries. It's part of our services, it's part of our programs, it's part of the collections that we provide. But if we're also not assessing those things, just like if we're not assessing the other services and programs, it's going to be challenged. And people are going to push back on it, and they're going to say, why are you bothering? So specifically for those of us, that's where we're coming from. That's where we have to push ourselves to make sure that we are assessing the work we're doing, to show the value, to show the worth of that work.
On that. So a lot of my background's in public health, working with communities of color, LGBTQ+ community members, as well as people in the deaf community. And I think in assessments, especially inclusive assessments, allow us to really elevate the voices of marginalized communities. When we think about public health, it's really a strategy to improve the health of everyone in our community. And in order to do that, we need to hear from folks. And we know that our systems, the way they're structured right now, really don't capture the voices of marginalized communities equally. And so we want to make sure that there's a way that creates an avenue for everyone to participate, for everyone's voices to be heard, and for us to be able to understand what people are experiencing right now in the time of COVID. It's been especially important for us to hear from those we haven't been able to hear from previous. it also allows us to disaggregate the data in ways and understand social determinants and how that's all impacting individuals. Conduct assessments and see the data there. Dichotomous thinking and really creates a starting point for having some of these difficult yet integral conversations and being realistic about expectations for progress and creating a metric for measuring that as well.
So for me, when I think about assessment, right, assessment is evaluation. And in the case of racial equity, we're talking about, a systematic process of documenting and using data to get to the heart of what's the state of your organization, what is your level of knowledge, of skill, of attitudes, beliefs of your organization, and using multiple data gathering processes to determine the extent to which your organization is equitable towards the communities that you're meant to support. So for racial equity work to be effective, it must be centered in outcomes, in goals. And in order for us to be able to measure progress, we must assess where we start, right? To get that baseline. And this is starting from the organization's readiness and capacity to do the work. If you're starting out, are you ready to move a race and social justice agenda? Are you ready as an organization to move an anti-racist agenda? And you must also assess your internal organization structure, process, decision-making, program development. When I think about maybe some questions that capture those thoughts, because you're talking about organizational beliefs as this like big picture, and then where are the individuals, especially leadership? And there may be a disconnect, right? You may have as an organization, be all about Black Lives Matter and you sent your in solidarity message, but when you look internally, you may not be as ready as you think you are, right? Or the organization, when you look at processes, is not really reflecting those values. So when you think about what are questions that you should ask, and this is all assessment, is, are you intentionally building alliances or partnerships with other organizations and communities of color? Who is currently committed to doing the work? And this is racial justice work, so it's hard work. And is leadership committed to this work? What is motivating people within the organization to take on this work? The why is central. And that's when you also get to, when you add a racial analysis, a race analysis to your work as an organization, are you sure you're not doing it to be in a better place to receive grants, right? Or generate numbers? Are you maybe just calling on spokespeople of color for that one panel once a year? What is and has been your organization's relationships with people of color? And relationships mean, how long have you been working together? If you have a partnership, and I'm thinking with my hat of arts and culture, right? If you're thinking about a partnership on a program, have you all come to the table to design that program? Or do you just, again, this is the planning with or planning for, right? Or did you bring them in once you planned? So again, I think when I think about assessment, I see it directly tied to outcomes and as the way to be able to measure where we are, from budget process to your team's yearly goals to, again, the big, the big statement from an organization of we support equity. So, yeah.
I love that, and I love the variance of answers from so we know what we're doing, right? So we know where we're starting, so we know how we're serving our community, so we know how we're meeting the needs of the disproportionately impacted communities that we hope to serve. That is why assessment matters, and I'm glad and grateful that you all spoke to that. So moving into the next question, I'll drop it in the chat. How are you assessing your work on an organizational level? So within the different sectors that you are all working at, what is your organization doing?
So for us, and again, this is from, maybe it'll be more relevant to nonprofits, but I think when you go to processes, right, you go first to decision-making, and that's from how you budget to, to your team. So for us, when we think about processes, for example, we are a grant maker. So for us we've literally gone through every application, every guideline. I've sat down with team, and after receiving feedback directly from applicants, then we've gone line by line, right? And asking the question, why are we asking this question? Do we really need this to make it an informed decision? Or is this the way, for us, there were processes that have been in place for more than 10 years. And a lot of them, I didn't understand why we were asking this question or another. We required letters from city council, or we required, and I'm like, why? We work with city council every day, but an artist may not. In terms of decision making, I would say is, again, from looking at who's at the table. Everybody has heard that. But then being very specific. In terms of planning for programming, or in our case, selection panels, for us is very tied to who's represented and who's not. And we must be very specific about it. For us we will not consider a decision-making space ready to go into the work until we have at least 50% of those participants being representatives, either being BIPOC or representatives from historically marginalized groups. And this may seem as something like obvious or basic, but you have no idea the pushback that you may get, right? So the way I've explained it in the past is, what I'm asking is, let's please make sure that no more than 50% are white heterosexual men that have no disabilities, right? The rest, when you look at it, is the rest of our society. And I think it's also being willing to look at, and again, I'm talking about processes, like asking why we are requesting or asking the question, who is making the decision, demographic information, right? We must hold ourselves accountable. And I think it's about, right, what is the demographic makeup of your board, of your team, of your hiring team, of applicants, of awardees, of partners. And you must be very systematic. And again, this may be scary because you're afraid of what the results may be. But I think, again, if you are not brave enough to get to that, then you might as well not start. And for us, I will maybe put on the chat, there is, it's called Retool, Equity in the Panel Room. And this was, I'm one of the co-authors, and we developed this specifically for philanthropy. But the reality is, if you take equity in the decision-making table, you can bring all of those pieces of the toolkit into any time you're making a decision. So I will share that on the chat, but these are some examples of, oh, and lastly, I would say yearly evaluations. So every member of my team, I've sat down with them, and obviously for every member is different, but we have designed what are their goals for the year related to our equity framework.
And I guess I can speak to this from the perspective of, let's say, academic libraries specifically. I don't work in one now. I've worked in plenty in the past. I'm also now learning to look at this from the perspective of LIS education and what we're doing to actually assess our own work, which is a whole different ballgame right now. But at least for what we're seeing in academic libraries is that there's a struggle to do this type of assessment, to do this type of work, to actually look at ourselves in this way. A couple of instruments have been created in the past that look at little snapshots of things. So climate qual is something that a lot of academic libraries will attempt to use to try to get a better understanding of the climate for their organization. The problem with climate qual, of course, is that it can single out individuals who are one and the only one, which happens a lot in our libraries. And also it's very much looking at perspectives of particular people, which really doesn't give you this whole cohesive view of your organization. It's really looking at one aspect of the organization. One thing I have been working on for the last couple of years is trying to create some type of assessment instrument for academic libraries that allows them to holistically look at themselves, to really take a look at what we're doing policy-wise, procedure-wise, hiring. We are having trouble moving away from counting as our way of assessing diversity. And I think some of that for us is because we've always counted everything. We counted books, we counted our collections. That's how you knew what the top libraries were. How many books do you have in your collection? That doesn't work for DEI. It doesn't work at all, especially when you're not looking at what that number really means. So we have 10 people of color. Great, is it the same 10 people of color? Or do you have a revolving door process going on where you've got people coming in and people going out because it's not the type of sustainable environment for them? So taking a deeper look at what does our collection development policy look like? What do our hiring policies look like? Where is the money going in terms of finances, and how much money is being earmarked? Or is it more of a, let's beg for this and hope they actually support this? Kind of going back to what Tariana was saying about, what's the budget looking like? Well, for us, it's, are you earmarking money specifically for this work? Or is it kind of, if we ask, maybe they'll give it to us, maybe they won't. And then also, yes, looking at that leadership picture. Where is the leadership in terms of decision making and how they're making decisions? Are they even including the voices of the librarians, the library staff, the student workers, the community we serve? All those things are actually now, they go into play into this. And I think that's what we lose sight of. A lot of decisions in academic libraries are made at a top administrative level. And if that administration is not concerned about DEI, then the library is not going to be concerned about DEI. And so trying to put something in place that forces them to look at all these different puzzle pieces and say that it's not just counting, it's not just the hiring thing that we're doing over here that we've been talking about for 30 years, and we're still at 12% in libraries. Something's not working. So let's move beyond that and let's actually look at how we are seeing our organizations and how they're being built, and what we're doing to support people when they come in, but also what we're doing to support the people we serve and that we work with, recruiting students to come into the library so they stay in that environment and actually respect that environment and maybe want to become a part of that environment. Those are all the things we have to look at. So I will say that this process of trying to create this instrument to give academic libraries an opportunity has been a struggle, because unfortunately the history of our libraries is what's coming into play. So when we're asking people to assess their work, they're thinking about all the negative things that happened the 10 years before and not thinking about the possibilities of what the library is doing now. So that climate piece is important and we have to look at it, but we also have to basically break the library apart. We have to break it down and actually start looking at all those different pieces that really build us up. And the unfortunate news for a lot of us is we also have to look at the organizations we exist within when it comes to academic libraries, because sometimes it doesn't matter what your library wants to do. If your institution is moving in a completely different direction, you have almost no hope of being able to support DEI efforts. And so we can try to fix it from within. You have to try to fix it from within, but then you also might have another battle on your hands when it comes to the overarching organization that you're working with.
A lot of similar thoughts from my end as well, I'd say, with this question of how to assess what kind of assessment we're doing at the organizational level. As a consultant, I really try and tailor the approach to every industry, every organization that I'm working with, depending on where they are in this work. But I wanted to share a framework that was created with the Colorado Trust through their Quality and Health Initiative a while back. And I think it's something that can be adaptable to a lot of different areas. So there's sort of three elements to this. The first is around personal and professional, and really assessing individual board members, staff, volunteers, key partners, donors, all the individuals who are involved in the work that you're doing, and assessing their awareness and understanding around equity related topics, their skills in having difficult conversations and effectively serving diverse communities, things of that nature, and really assessing those at the individual level and then also as the collective. So for teams or full staff organizations, seeing how there's progression made in those areas once those goals are set. The second tier is around infrastructure. So really looking at the organizational piece around policies, procedures. Budget is definitely a huge thing. So I want to reiterate that part of, if there are funds dedicated to EDI work, is it from the general funds and consistently funded year to year, or is it just grant funds that are coming in and specifically brought in for kind of a side project type of thing? and changes around that. Hiring, definitely a big component of that, changes in hiring strategies as well as onboarding and really understanding the spread of diversity within an organization's staff structure and decision-making power and how that power is shared across staff members as well. Looking at organizational culture, inclusive data collection, reporting, all of those different elements I really see as being a part of that infrastructure piece. And then that allows us to assess if we're making changes in systems and shifting power in a more equitable structure moving forward. And then the third element that I often look at through this framework is around community. So really understanding if there is inclusive decision-making, not just among staff and board members, but also among disproportionately impacted community members who are ultimately experiencing whatever the mission of the organization is and what we're trying to impact, and making sure that there are effective strategies and equitable strategies to hear from communities about their perceptions of the organization as well. So it's great if in a staff assessment, staff members feel like they're doing well and progressing in DEI work, but if community members and clients that we're serving disagree with that, then we need to rethink our own perceptions around that as well. So those are some of the structures that I use with organizational assessments.
Dr. Suzuho, they're asking if you can restate the name of the tool from the Colorado Trust again.
Yeah, so at the time, and again, this was close to a couple decades ago when it was first started, so the language has changed. It was initially called the Cultural Competency Development Plan, and I think people have adapted the title of the tool as we've moved away from cultural competency or equality into equity and things like that, but that was the original title.
Thank you so much for that clarification. Wow. Like I said, this panel is hot, so I'm not even gonna spend time commentating. I will ask what everyone is asking, and that is, what are then the best practices for measuring progress and setting? I like to use SMART goals, again, just specific, measurable, all of those realistic goals as it relates to EDI. I'm gonna drop that in the chat, and let's spice it up this time and start with Dr. Suzuho.
And some of you may have heard of SMARTY goals as well. And so that's something that I've tried to spread whenever I hear SMART goals. And the IE stands for inclusive and equitable goals as well. So really thinking about how we can structure goals in a way that always has inclusivity and equity in mind. And it reminds me of the candy, so that's always fun too. So thinking about the process for setting goals, ensuring that the process is also equitable, not just the goal itself. So again, going back to decision-making power and how we can elevate the voices of disproportionately represented and disproportionately impacted community members, especially if your staff are still working on diversifying and integrating diverse perspectives into your decision-making process. I think that's an area that is really helpful in setting SMARTY goals and ensuring that there's a community-driven approach to that. I also think it's really important to find common ground across different priorities. So as we think about how to actually do this in practice, being able to adapt and be fluid, knowing that people, there's the I don't know what I don't know element. And as we all learn more, I think this is a collective journey that we're all on. We'll continue to grow our own understanding and awareness around these issues. And I think being able to adapt those goals to best fit the progression that every individual and every organization is making in this work is really important, and ensuring again that there is that equitable structure in setting those goals. A lot of times traditionally goals for an organization have been set by the C-suite or at the managerial level, and as I work with different organizations, really trying to hear from all levels of the organization and understanding how to value those in a way that really allows all voices to be heard. And I think that's not only good in creating a more inclusive work environment and creating space for improved morale and inclusivity, but also ultimately better for the organization as well, to be able to really integrate the perspectives of diverse thought.
I guess I'll jump in. I'm like waiting to be told what to do. So yeah, I love again using SMARTY goals. And what I like about it is that I mean, this is work that doesn't happen naturally by accident. And it doesn't happen because you're a good person, right? It doesn't happen because you're not racist. What we're really talking about is that institutional, right? That systemic racism, please, which means that we are all part of institutions that for generations, for hundreds of years, have actually set rules and structures that are based on a white supremacy culture. And when I say white supremacy, again, this is not KKK, it's about a set of values and ways to do the work, right? You know, there's in white supremacy, there's a sense of urgency, right? It's like we need to, which I tie it to the fact that this work takes time. I always think about stop, slow down, and make a decision, right? And ask the question. It's like stop, slow down, ask the question. And really that's what the equity lens is about, right? You need to be willing to, even if it's something that you feel very comfortable about, and you are, again, you are a person with strong values, and you are a good person, to be willing to say, I'm gonna stop, slow down the process, and ask the questions about how, not just what we're doing, but how we're doing it and why we're doing it. And as a tangible example, you know, I get a lot of questions about an interest in, you know, we want to diversify our board, right? But we want to make sure that we don't tokenize people. So how do we do that work? So again, start with a SMARTY goal. You know, there is, you know, you can say by end of this year, we're going to recruit 3 new members with at least one of them experience in marketing. What a SMARTY goal would be is maybe by end of the year, you will recruit 3 new members, at least 2 are gonna be BIPOC, to increase the diversity makeup of our board from 20% to 40%, right? It's, again, I think there's a lot of fear sometimes of that assessment piece, because then it's gonna show maybe what you're not doing. And that is real. I mean, I felt it with team members, you know, members of my team, and I had to reassure them that there was no judgment in this. I'm part of the system, but if we don't know if we are at 10%, we're never gonna get to 100, right? If we're at 10, then you know what? Then let's move to a 20. You know, right? It's going to be slow if we want to do it right, and we also need to embrace the fact that in order for the work to be done right, we have to look long term. And I think there was the question about, you know, what's the difference between planning for versus planning with. The with part is that relationship, and I know we throw that word out, you know, building relationships, but that's the long-term piece, right? That means that you're gonna have a lot of coffees. That means that you're gonna have a lot of questions, you know, about learning more about this new partner. You're gonna be transparent about what your intentions are. And as a woman of color in this space, I would tell you that for me, it makes a huge difference if from the start, you come authentically and humble, and you say, I know we have to do better. I don't know where to start. You know, help. I will automatically feel generous, you know, unless you, on the contrary, right? Or if I see a solidarity statement and I'm like, please, like, I know you, I know what you do. Like, believe me, you're not gonna, you know, people know when the work is gonna be done. So, so yeah, I think that's, those critical pieces are important.
And I think I can echo pretty much everything that's been said. I do want to emphasize a couple of things, especially for academic libraries. One, benchmarking is essential. We do not do enough benchmarking for DEI at all. And once again, not just counting the employees you have who happen to be BIPOC, benchmarking all your diversity efforts. And double checking, make sure you're not doing what we call the holidays and heroes in terms of displays and events. You don't have to wait till a holiday or wait for a special thing to happen for you to celebrate those different things in libraries, or to put together displays, or to pull books or buy books, things like that. But I also want to put out a challenge right now to academic libraries. We're talking about how to create SMARTY goals and things like that. I'm challenging us to create any goals related to DEI. There are so many academic libraries out there where I've pulled up the strategic plan, you know, a beautiful 3-year plan, And I've combed through it word for word, and there's nothing in there, nothing at all about DEI. And that is ridiculous. And especially since we know that it's not just built in, we know it's not going to be, oh, it's happening. No, it has to be spelled out. If you're putting that much effort into creating a document that's going to guide your organization, which means that's where you're putting your efforts, your money, everything, and DEI is not represented, then DEI is not being touched in your organization, plain and simple. And so I'm challenging libraries to look at your strategic plans. I'm also challenging them to look at what they allow their employees to do. Because sometimes you can't create a goal that's going to be rewarded for your yearly work that's based on DEI. And we recognize this is a problem. That work is not seen as being at the same level as the other work you do. It needs to be seen at the same level. So if any employee wants to put a DEI goal into their yearly goals, that should be celebrated. That's fine. There's nothing, and it shouldn't be a special goal. Oh, by the way, here's your special DEI goal for the year. No, if that person wants to have 7 goals that are all strictly DEI, but they all support the library, there's nothing wrong with that. And it needs to be rewarded and celebrated and encouraged. So I'm actually challenging libraries to make sure we're looking at the goals we do, the work we do in terms of DEI beyond the overlay, beyond the plug-in. It's not an additional thought. It's not an afterthought. This is something that needs to be integrated into the work we're doing. And it starts with our strategic planning. And it starts with the way we assess our librarians and our library staff and anybody working in the library. And so I'm putting that challenge out there. I'm saying, I am tired of looking at strategic plans where I have to read 30 pages and I get nothing out of it. I'm tired of that. I want to be, and no, I don't want it to be seen as, oh, by the way, asterisk, here's our diversity piece at the bottom. No, I should be able to read all of your activities, your events, everything you're planning, and guarantee you there's going to be something that DEI fits in there. Talk about your collections, DEI fits in your collections. Talk about going out and getting grants, DEI fits into that as well. There's no excuse. And so I'm putting that out there now. Here's the call. We have to do this. No more extra, no more it's additional, no more this. No, it's part of the work we do, and it needs to be visibly seen that way.
And I would even further say, start with your mission, right? I always ask organizations, I look at the mission first and foremost, and then I look at your work. Are they connected, right? Because the mission says what you do. And sometimes I see organizations that I'm having a hard time connecting that. So that's your first piece. And then if you're talking about making, and I think I see a lot of organizations, and this is a great first step, is that statement of commitment to this work, right? Then look at that mission, right? And think about what that means for your mission. How do you bring that into what you do? And I would say that you can always start with that acknowledgement of where you are, even if it's, we have not done this. Again, for me, I'm gonna, if I read that, automatically, I'm gonna be so proud, even if I don't know you, right? To be vulnerable and to say, we have to do better. We don't know where to start, but we're committed to doing this. So it first starts over here, and the goal, which happens systemically and slowly, is it starts to become integrated, right, into everything you do. And you learn what it means for your budgeting, from your marketing, from your program goals, for your individual goals. I mean, it eventually will get there, but it's okay to start over here and just making a statement, an authentic statement of, this is our commitment, and this is how we plan to do it. So I would say a further challenge, right, to own where you are, right? And it's okay to do that, because believe me, again, and I don't speak for every, Latina woman, but I can tell you that in my experience, that makes a huge difference, to acknowledge where you are publicly.
Awesome. I'm trying to look at some of these questions that are coming in because some of these are so hot and I want to make sure we get to a few of them. Let's jump to one of those. So surprise with the panelists. This is one that I did not prep you all for. But it's an interesting question that I think is worth sharing with you all. And that is, how can we shift the role of assessments from focusing on numbers to social impact, especially when it's difficult to show return on investment with EDI work?
Well, this is actually where I get to harp on the other part of my research. And this is where I push back on the fact that we're not training and preparing people to do any type of actual evaluation or research methodology. They don't even understand how to begin that process. So it is possible. I mean, we talk about benchmarking. Yes, that's a piece of it, but it is possible to basically run studies in your library. It's possible to gather the data you need to actually show that you have a return on your investment. Even though I think I saw in the chat that someone's like, we don't like the return on investment language either, because that's kind of going back to the white supremacist view of society. But I think it's important that we recognize that starting in libraries, one of the first things you have to do is stop just counting books and start looking at people, not just your people who work there, but look at the people who use your services and start talking to everybody. It's qualitative research, people. I'm gonna throw it out there for you. It's qualitative research. Quantitative research, it's in my heart. I have a degree, I work on it. Numbers are beautiful, I love them. But if you're not talking to people, all the people, and hearing from them about the impact of what's going on, and then of course, teaching others that qualitative research has value as well. So yes, we know it. We know the people who give money, they're like, oh, where are your numbers? Okay, I have numbers for you, but can we please talk about these people I talk to who are gonna tell you, what you really need to hear and understand. So we do have to prepare people to think about the work they're doing in terms of, how can I gather more data about this? Who do I need to talk to? And then how do I present that data to show that it's not just about the numbers. It's not just about the number of people. It's about the fact that having 2 BIPOC people on your reference desk means that you've increased the number of BIPOC students who've come to that desk to ask questions because they feel more comfortable. But we don't have the evidence to do that because we don't talk to the people to know it's true. We feel it. It's anecdotal. Anecdotes aren't going to get you support. They're not going to get you funding. They're not going to get you the things you need. So just talk to them. IRB will let you have to ask, but IRB will let you talk to people, but talk to those students, talk to those faculty who are receiving that same type of support because you're buying for their collections, for their research on DEI, which we know is not always supported in what they do. So talk to them about the impact of the library being able to provide access to databases and other resources that they need desperately for their research, because they're also not funded as highly as other faculty members who come into those other areas. And so they don't have the money to buy it themselves. So talk about that, talk to them, do interviews with them, do focus groups, get that type of information, and that's gonna help you move beyond just the counting that we do of our employees, of our staff members and our students. So I have to push the research methodology thing. It's the other part of what I do, so.
Do you want to jump in, Suzuho?
Sure, yeah, I can build off of that a little bit. A fellow mixed methods.
I'll go last.
Not
you change it a little.
Nice. Yeah, I think, the question is great because that really creates a space for us to create this culture shift that is absolutely necessary. And I agree with 100% that we have to, teach or kind of change the system that tends to overvalue quantitative information and data, and to understand the value of the qualitative information and to really get to the why and the underlying stories. And I think with numbers, it's so easy for for individuals to either disregard numbers or to place value judgments on numbers based on how they value where the numbers are coming from and how they were collected and all of those things. And I think with the qualitative side, really understanding the impact of what's happening and what the numbers mean and why that is the way it is, it also forces us as people who may be conducting assessments and creating reports to really be able to capture the true story of what's happening. And so I agree 100% that that's a culture shift that needs to happen, and really allowing us to also be, I think, more inclusive in that way. Numbers and surveys and data collection is not the most appreciated mode of communication for all cultures, maybe for some, but not all. And so it really forces us as evaluators, as researchers, and organizations trying to assess the impact of our work to be more thoughtful and strategic and intentional about the way that we are understanding the impacts that we're having on community members. And to be honest, a lot of the impacts that we are trying to have through our social justice and racial equity work can't be captured in numbers. It's way more nuanced than that. So it is absolutely necessary for us to shift away from just data and, well, just numbers, and that data is not just numbers.
So what agreed on everything that my two partners here have said. I would say too that I still remember to this day, and as I'm sure my partners, we've done this work our entire careers, right? We don't know how not to bring that lens into who we are and the work we do. But I still remember the morning I woke up, and again, this may seem obvious, but that I realized, right, we've never seen an equitable world. We've never experienced it, right? So that's the complexity of it. Like, imagine having a goal to achieve something that we've never experienced, right? I mean, and I say this because when we look about being able to capture impact and being able to do that, I think qualitative and quantitative, right, must be connected. Because storytelling, especially with this work, it's critical to be able to share that story. And I think that if you imagine a PowerPoint, right, we can have a slide with tons of numbers, but your impact will be different if you have numbers and then you have a couple of pictures of actual people in the community happy and experiencing that. And that, again, is a simplistic way of saying it, but if you think about it, is that combination that creates this story, right? It actually, you're making a statement that you are being systematic and you're committed to the work and you're holding yourself accountable with the numbers, and you're also committed to the people. This is about people, right? And this is about actually connecting them, having those relationships. And that's what brings those numbers to life. And I think it also takes it to, for example, what my fellow presenters mentioned is talk to people, right? And for me, I mean, again, from our philanthropic space, which is we are already in a power structure, right? We have the money, they do not. We can make powerful decisions, they cannot. Is how do we shift that culture of that participatory, culture of in decision making? It's not just about your decision because you've been doing this forever and you know best and you know your programs and you have the money, but how do you become, again, vulnerable and you open that space for the participatory part, of decision making? And how do you do that? And what that means, again, is that you have to acknowledge your power and your privilege, which, again, I have a lot of power because I can make decisions that are going to impact residents in Denver, and I have a lot of privilege because I have that money, right? So I need to start with that and saying, how am I willing to step back and share that? How am I willing to maybe hear from those that may not agree with the decisions I've made? And in terms of capturing that, I would say is you can assess the social impact, I think, initially with your own work. And how do you look internally at how your team and how your processes are, and in our agency, we have internal goals as well as external goals, because until you get your house in order, right, that work has to continue. And then out there, I think, is really be willing to tell the story in a different way. I mean, for us, final reports are actually like 2 or 3 questions. And basically it is giving organizations permission. When I say, I want to know if what you wanted to do, you were able to do it. I want to know what was challenging. And this is not going to impact whether I give you money or not. I truly want to know so that I can learn, so that I can be better, so that I can, figure out if you need more money or money in a different way. And then lastly, ask the question of, again, would you do things differently? they are the ones that are going to give you the truth. And you have to, again, be willing to change that power structure to get the true answers, and being able to say, you know, I've done these programs, of the 3, 2 didn't work. That's okay. So again, it's creating that long-term relationship to actually get to the truth.
I love the responses, and I love how this really nicely segues into the next question. Before I get into the question, I will, one, really shout out research. Research, my background is in research. I don't know if anyone actually knows that. I have a degree in psychology and anthropology, and a lot of my emphasis is on cross-cultural research, what it means to go into a community and to learn about them and really center them in that journey. One of the things that I am really passionate is about culturally responsive approaches to research, culturally responsive approaches to assessment and evaluation, and what it looks like beyond the quantitative, qualitative binary. So picking out, like, what are alternative methods for inquiring, for getting these answers? What are art-based methods for getting research? What are other modalities that are really responsive to the cultures that we're really trying to solicit that data from, that we've seen as best practices, and can you share that with the group?
I think that's almost a tougher one to address, because I can tell you about the processes that I think would work, but have I had a chance to apply them myself? No. It's actually interesting though, Ozzy, hearing you talk about like the anthropological process and being able to come at it from that perspective. And a lot of people in libraries know that Rochester did that. They decided to take more of an anthropological approach with their library and try to understand their students especially, but you know, not just the ones using the library, but the ones not using the library and why they're not using the library. But for me, I just encourage people to yes, think outside the box. I've been seeing a lot of the chat going up talking about surveys and kill the surveys. Don't kill them completely. Surveys do have value. It's just about doing better surveys, doing good surveys, and following them up with interviews and focus groups and things like that. But you can also, like you were mentioning, this whole idea of more of a participatory process of maybe you're not the one doing the data collection. Maybe you're not the one who's actually standing there with your clipboard and basically being in power in that process and dictating the process. Maybe you're giving that over to those that you want to hear from. So one of the things you all often do is offer training, of course, because they need to know some things about data collection, but set them free. let them tell you based on what they see and what they do, what's most important, or what they think you need to know about them. Photo voice is another option that has started to show up a lot in libraries. It's a basically give them a camera, give them some questions, let them answer visually for you what it means to do certain things, like where do you study, or where do you do this, or where do you do that, and then talk to them about it. Don't just take the pictures and start splashing around the library like this is what our people said. No, you sit down and you talk to them. Tell me about this picture. Tell me what it means to you. Tell me what I can do to better support that. So especially for me, I've been pushing the photo voice option quite a bit. When I was redesigning the research methods course at the University of Denver, I included a section on it. And I wanted my students to consider it. I wanted them to go into the field, not just thinking research methods was this quantitative, qualitative, some mixed methods, but that there's so many other things you can explore. And so I specifically pushed that one as one that I thought they would want to consider, because it gives them another option. And it's so inclusive of the people that you're working with. And it gives them a chance to tell their stories that way. So for me, that would be the one that I like, one of the ones. And then also just reminding that maybe it's not just you asking the questions. Maybe it's not just you in the field. Maybe there's other ways to get others involved in that process so that you're actually getting a better picture, a cleaner picture, and where you're not just putting your views on what you're seeing, because ethnocentrism is an issue, even for those of us who are BIPOC. What we see and how we interpret things is based on who we are. And we have to be careful about that. So give them a chance to tell you who they are before you try to tell them who you think they are.
That really resonates with me for a number of reasons. I think even when we think about how we determine our goals and our programs as a system, and this is not just libraries, but again, government, philanthropy, nonprofits, we make so many assumptions about what the community needs, right? And And that can be problematic. I mean, if you get really, really lucky, it will be great. But the reality is, starting from the question of, just because this program sounds great, do they really want it? Do they really need this? And also it depends right on the time. For example, 2 weeks ago, we hosted a town hall for BIPOC artists. And the goal was to listen. And the goal was to actually, for me to say, I need to be very strategic about how I invest dollars right now, because the reality is we're not making money. So I have this bucket, so I need to be really strategic. So right now I need to ask you, what do you need the most, right? And believe it or not, the majority of what they need is not tied to any money, right? It's tied to how we do the work. So, so I think, again, that's a great place to start in terms of being able to ask people what they need. And in terms of the cultural piece, I think, I remember doing a training to a group of business people that were about to get a contract to work in Puerto Rico. And they wanted to know, again, how do we approach working with people in Puerto Rico? And if you show up,
Oh, I think you're muted.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would say, if you go to a meeting, the way you would go to a meeting here, it ain't gonna go well, right? Believe me that you're gonna spend the first 15 minutes, they may be late, you're gonna spend the first 15 minutes just talking about everything except what you're meeting about. Get comfortable with that, right? And if you go to dinner, right? Believe me, if you start talking about we're gonna split the check, that is so just tacky. No. Somebody's gonna say it's on me, and you have to accept that. So I give those two examples in terms of how people, right, relate to each other. And I think here in the States, especially with communities of color, there is a big issue of trust. And I think we need to address that, especially I'm government, right? When you're talking about big institutions, even library, government, there is an issue of trust. So a lot of communities, you have to be very explicit of what you're asking, how you're gonna use the information and how you're not gonna use the information, who has access to that information, what do you expect to get from the information. So all of those details are critical in order for you to create that space of trust where people will feel comfortable about sharing anything, frankly. So, and I've experienced that, and you have to make sure, especially, and again, if you are wanting to connect with certain communities and you don't have people that look like them, it's gonna be an uphill battle. So if you wanna have a tangible of a pro of having a diverse team, I can tell you right now that it makes a huge difference in terms of building that trust if you can actually show that you believe in the value of having a diverse team.
I can build on that a little bit. I agree of, really needing to tailor assessments and evaluation strategies to every culture, and recognizing that there's also, nuances to the intersections of different identities and subpopulations, each having their own culture. An example I wanted to share of something I've worked on previously is really trying to capture the impact of historical trauma in the Japanese American and Japanese community and understanding what resilience means. And I think I learned a lot through that experience because I love what Kawanna was saying too around photo voice. It's something that is so helpful in a lot of communities, and it's a growing strategy I think that's been implemented that I had used in other projects and other communities previously, but within this effort I really understood more around certain community members really latching on to the idea of photo voice, but being hesitant to share about their own story. So being asked of like, what does that mean to you? Or what were you experiencing in that picture was really challenging for a lot of our older adult populations within this culture, and being able to ask them, kind of changing our strategies to ask about what was everyone experiencing, what was going on in that group, allowed them to share a little bit more. Or we also used video narratives as a strategy. So really having family members or close friends who were a little bit more from the younger generation asking the older generation about what they were experiencing at that time. There's so much kind of resistance to talking about what happened during the war, and I think that was really an effective way for us to be able to learn that, and for children and grandchildren to be able to hear what their grandparents and relatives experienced. And then when we talked about kind of the impact of ongoing intergenerational historical trauma, the youth had very different thoughts around these strategies and were not at all interested necessarily in talking about the collective, a lot of times because they didn't know what that collective experience was. They knew that they were experiencing things in their childhood that were different than what their white counterparts were experiencing, but because there were so few Japanese American students in a classroom, they didn't realize that shared experience was there until they got to more of a focus group, community dialogue type of setting. So I think really being able to adapt your strategy as we all learn with each step of these assessments is also an important thing to keep in mind, and was definitely a big lesson learned on my part as well, and recognizing the diversity within the community that I felt like I was a part of.
Thank you so much for that, because again, a perfect segue. I'm a social worker, right? Macro social work, and my passion is around healing historical trauma. And that is what's really cool about these narrative interventions and these narrative methodologies, because one, it contributes data to whoever is trying to conceptualize around this thing, right? But it also becomes this healing tool for the participant, quote unquote, understudy. And so it becomes that reciprocal relationship, because it's never about what are we trying to extract from this community in order to make us better, but like, what are we trying to also in return help them with, benefit them with. And so I love that you named digital storytelling. Digital storytelling is a really, really, really cool tool to, one, get information into how a community is experiencing whatever service that you're doing, but also to archive, especially for historically marginalized groups. Dr. Ramona Beltran at the University of Denver does really dope work around digital storytelling in the Indigenous community and healing and historical trauma. And so I would encourage looking into her work. Thank you, Kawanna, for shouting out Photo Voice. That is also my background. I've done some really interesting Photo Voice projects. I just wrapped up one last year at the end of it with the City and County of Denver, looking into city planning and how can we use that as a tool to be able to help inform our plan so that it's actually representing the communities that are supposed to be a part of those plans, right? So there's definitely a lot of really interesting work in terms of including and incorporating the arts into research and using that to do more than just extract data, but to really help archive history, to help folks interrogate what identity means to them, but also to bring healing to communities that have been harmed by these research institutions. So that's one of the things that I would plug. And I would also say, folks were saying this in the chat, but the idea of just saying, tell me a story, right, is very, like, that is really profound. I'll get off my soapbox in like 2 minutes, but in year, I was a sophomore in college, and I was fortunate enough to travel to the Dominican Republic to do a project interrogating how race was perceived in the Dominican Republic. I don't know if you all understand the history between the Dominican Republic and Haiti, but there's a lot of interesting racial history there. And so all I did was ask people to tell me a story. And based on what they were telling, I could use phenomenological analysis to piece out what their lived experience was based on that. And so it wasn't me asking all of these provocative questions, but me just asking them, what do you want to talk about? What moves you? What is a concern for you? And then from there, letting them tell me the story that can help inform the story that I was trying to tell. So definitely reach out to students who do this work, to scholars who are doing this work, because not everyone has the gift to be able to to get at this, right? And that's being very honest. And so there are folks that do this, there are folks that are trained in this, and if you can find those consults, if you can find those people outside of your organization, do that instead of trying to do something yourself that you're not equipped to doing. So definitely use that. And if you're in Denver, I would reach out to the University of Denver, because they have a community engaged research lab where that's what they do. They have a program, you can submit research ideas, projects that you need help with, and there's scholars that are able to then do the research for you based on whatever their training is so that you can utilize this extra service, right? So definitely look into ways to create internships, ways to tap into folks that need practice, that need these internships or whatever, that are also really trained and capable of doing what you at your organization might not have the budget or the funds or the resources to do alone. And the last question I think we'll get into, now that I'm done talking about my love of research, is accountability. How do we hold folks accountable in a way that isn't purely punitive? And how do we create accountability measures within organizations to mitigate the harm that historically underrepresented folks experience?
So I think it goes back to, oh, and the last, I wanted to mention that when we talk about, again, culturally responsive, I think just keep in mind also the idea of sovereignty of culture. When I talk about culture, arts and culture, I'm not talking just about visual arts, right? I'm talking about culture as the way communities choose to raise their children, language, the food they eat, the way they gather. So I would always say expand your own ideas about community and culture when you're doing this work. I would say in terms of how do we measure progress, I guess that was the question, in a way that is not punitive. I mean, I think it goes back to what we talked at the beginning of the conversation, which is, I don't want to be negative, but if you don't have the commitment of leadership, I spent many, many years of my professional career doing it very quietly. At times it felt quite subversive. And, my progress was in little pieces, but it was never systemic, right? I was able to, at the point that sometimes I had to sacrifice my own, best interest in my job to be able to do what was right? So I think now that we're living in a society where we're actually calling it out, where we're actually, and again, the equity conversation has been around for the last, 15 years, that, but certainly not with the impetus that we feel now. But I would say is you have to have a commitment at an organizational level, right? It must be from leadership as well. And then you must define what that means, why you are committed to this. Is it from a, basically because you have to follow laws and because you are wanting to make sure that you don't get sued? I mean, that's right. That's one reason why a lot of corporations and organizations do it, right? Compliance. That's one way. This is not the word that we're talking about here, right? We're talking about, are you willing to make this part of your foundational values, right? And leadership must be supportive of that. And when I say supportive, that doesn't mean that they need to know how to do it, but they need to both, if they don't, to acknowledge who, right? Who are the experts in the room and who's going to guide them to that process, and being able to relinquish that power. Because what that will mean is that get ready for change. Even at the smallest level, it means change, and it doesn't have to be punitive, because again, it's like, even if we acknowledge where we are, even if we're at 10%, that the goal is to, at the end of the year, to be 50, it's okay. If we start at 10, if we start at 5, if we start at 0, are we making progress? And I tell you, I mean, I live this. I'm the mother of a young man with a disability, and I cannot measure his progress based on neurotypical, right, ways and goals. And no, for me is he making progress from where he's at? And as long as that happens, I'm throwing a party, right? It's like, as long as I see that progress from where he started, that's, I think, the goal. So I would say is you have to be ready to look at the benefits to the organization, and that can start from looking at the scientific research of what the benefits of just having diversity on a group. And this is not even talking about race. This is just plain and simple diversity of thought. There's plenty of scientific research that proves that decisions are made much more efficiently, that better decisions are made quicker, all of that. So even starting from that point, if people, you know, are starting there, it's okay. And then moving ahead. And the last thing I'll say is that, you know, conversations about injustice and social change, you know, the harder conversations are going to be those conversations about race. We know that, right? So I think making sure that you are ready for that, that is not going to be, if we get to a point where it's going to be awkward, or if we get to a point that is going to be uncomfortable, oh no, it's going to happen. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be difficult. And you're only going to get better if you actually embrace that. You know, challenge doesn't mean combat, right? So embrace that challenge, because that will make you grow, right? And make sure that you're ready for, you know, I always say is winter is coming. So that's exactly what the work is like. You know, prepare yourself and make sure that that you're ready for it, and that leadership is ready for it.
I know we're over time, but I do want to give you a moment to respond. We're gonna just probably start the next session late. I'm sorry to everyone, but this has just been such a great conversation. I don't want to cut it short, so I'm gonna let you talk, Kawanna.
And I'll make it quick. I just want to kind of point out two things: that unfortunately, for someone to be accountable for something, there actually have to be repercussions if they don't do what they're supposed to do. I mean, that's the unfortunate part of this conversation. So we're saying, how do we do this without it being punitive? You might not be able to. Let's just be honest. If you actually want that change to happen, if someone is not going to have any repercussions for not following along with the process or doing what you're trying to do to integrate something, they're not going to do it. They're also going to try to sabotage it. And then you're nowhere. You're actually less than the 10% that Tariana mentioned. You're 5% now. You're 1%. You're 0%. And so I actually going to push back on that and say that why can't it be punitive if you're talking about behaviors in the workplace that are not acceptable in the first place? If they're not accepted, I mean, we talk about things like microaggressions, and it's a microaggression. It's an aggression. It's not a microaggression. It's hurtful to people. You can't verbally abuse your coworkers in the first place, regardless of why you're doing it. Why would you allow that and then not have it be punitive? We have progressive disciplinary actions in most academic libraries. Things that touch on DEI can fit right into that process as well. There's no reason why they're treated differently. There's no reason, because the problem is they've been ignored for years. Oh, it's just a microaggression, don't worry about it. That's not something you need to report. That's not something we need to deal with. It is. And there needs to be some type of repercussions for that type of behavior, because that's the behavior that means that the work is not getting done, plain and simple. So that's just my 2 cents, soapbox, I'm off.
I think that's great. Yeah, I think it's all of the above, right? I think we try and celebrate the wins and recognize that there are strength-based approaches to doing this. And at the end of the day, even if it's hard to be punitive, and I know that's not the first step that any of us would take in this work, but we also need to be steadfast in our values. We have to continue to reiterate our commitment. Leaders need to continue to reiterate their commitment to this work and how it aligns to the workplace culture that we're all trying to create. I agree 100% with what Kawanna said of, you know, we have HR policies around harassment and other things that are absolutely unacceptable in the workplace. This shouldn't be different. And so there's a balance in all of that. And one of my favorite quotes from someone that I worked with a while back, at the end of a 5-year journey, you know, they were like, oh, I finally understand like how helpful you were. So it was just like that mosquito that kept pushing and pushing. But it's the gentle pressure relentlessly applied. So creating an environment where people can learn and grow, but there can't be exceptions to the rule. Everyone needs to be held accountable to moving this work forward. There's shared responsibility, and we won't make progress without that.
Whew. Ha, ha, ha. This was amazing. Obviously, it was so amazing. We went 15 minutes over. I lost complete track of time, but thank you all so much for such a rich conversation. Thank you to the people in the chat. I will definitely read through those comments. I am just in awe of all of your expertise, and I'm so grateful for you all giving some of us what you are passionate about today. So thank you for that. Thank you to the folks who stayed in the discussion past the time. Our next conversation will be starting in 2 or so minutes. And it'll be more looking specifically at the work that DPL is working on right now. So definitely tune into that session to learn more about that. Please tune into our closing where we will have Susie Q. Smith, and please tune into our happy hour this evening where we will have the Black Excellence Band. Thank you all for sticking with us, and I hope to see you in the next session.
Thank you, Ozzy.
Thank you. So sorry for keeping you all.